in person. Before we get started, a couple of things I'd like to go over. Even though your mic is muted, make sure it stays muted. We don't like echoes coming in, and we don't like extraneous sounds. And also, if you're using a camera, a phone for your connection, be careful where you are and what you're doing while your camera is on. We don't want to see things that everybody else doesn't want to see, and you don't want us to see it either. So anyway, let's do that. We've got a chat function going on. Feel free to chat with your friends or to everybody. Post things up there if you like. If you got meetings coming up, got questions, go ahead and do that. And then make sure you stick around after the meeting, because we're going to have a little virtual session going on of networking, and that's always fun and exciting. So with that, let's begin.
For the past 30 years, on the third Wednesday of every month, Success North Dallas has had the best of the best in speakers. These speakers come not to be paid, but because of the people in the room. The people who have founded 98 companies, created over 1,000 jobs, and 7 Ernst & Young Entrepreneurs of the Year.
Good morning.
And
Bill
now,
Wallace.
Bill, you always cut me off when I try to introduce you properly.
Well, please do so.
And now, please welcome my S&D business partner and longtime friend, founder and CEO, Mr. Bill Wallace.
I feel like I'm in Saturday Night Wrestling.
There you go.
Well, see, Jan, when there's a pause, somebody has to fill the pause. So you paused and I filled the pause. And that's why I stepped over you. But anyway, welcome. I'm glad you all are here. This is our last virtual meeting as a virtual meeting only. We will be going back in person in March at Prestonwood Country Club. And we got some exciting news about that meeting that'll come up later. I'm like a newscaster or doing the weather will be coming right after this break. Jeff Curley has taught me well. But if you take a look at our S&D logo, it tells you what everyone aspires to success. The interconnecting C's, that's really how we do it. Connecting the right people for the right reasons at the right time. And that's been the essence of Success North Dallas from its beginning. Our qualifications for membership are simple. Be a success in your own eyes. I've got no right. No one has a right to tell you what success is for you. Honor your commitments. Let's go back to the handshake and be a giver. It's all about our fellow men and women. So ladies and gentlemen, we're excited to have you here. It's been quite a journey. You know, Albert Einstein once said, a life lived for others is the only life worth living. And that, in fact, is what embodies Success North Dallas. We have speakers from all over the world. They come here. They're not paid. Their expenses are not paid. They come because of you, the people in this room, the people that, as the tape said, and we did that 6 months ago, 5 months ago. It's not 98 companies. It's 101 companies now. 101 companies that have been started out of Success North Dallas, 1,253 jobs that we know of, and 7, soon to be 8, Ernst & Young Entrepreneurs of the Year. But February is an interesting month. February, for the last 19 years, we presented the Dallas Police Officer of the Year Award. And this February, due to COVID, and the fact that we have a new chief that just started 3 weeks ago, Eddie Garcia, we're going to be we've postponed that meeting to a point later in the year when the police command staff is comfortable coming to a meeting, actually when they're allowed to come. So just know that meeting is not gone. I've had a number of people ask me, why aren't you doing the Police Officer of the Year in February? Very simple. The police department are not comfortable having their command staff in one room with COVID right now. So we will be doing that later. And I want to take a moment to share some news. Not necessarily, it's Michael Webb. Many of you all know Michael Webb's wife, Rebel Webster, of 23 years. She passed 2 weeks ago at home in the midst of all of this COVID. She had other issues, but Michael asked me to let you all know that. And there will be some funeral arrangements. I think they're being made now, finally, but we'll pass that along. So if you know Michael, reach out to him. If you recall, he actually ran the Dallas Business Ethics Awards for many, many, many years and worked for several law firms as their media person. So I wanted to share that with everybody. You see a slide that's up now. That's our website. Our website by RP1, Brad Parnell. That's one of the things that we did during COVID. We designed an entirely new website. And as a result of that, we've changed our entire marketing plan during COVID, and things are going very, very well. And I want to give a special welcome to our guests, our first-time attendees, and the new members that have joined along the way. We would normally introduce you and have you stand up, but we're going to save that until the March meeting. But know that we welcome you. We're glad you're here because it's you people, the people in the room, that make Success North Dallas. I couldn't do it alone. There's a team, and it's a great team. But Jan Clauder today is running Zoom from his house. Lucinda Ruck and Casey Haston, they're our gatekeepers. They're kind of there to kick tail, keep the right people in the room and the wrong people out. Tammy Barrier, who coordinates our bonus programs and happy hours. And if right now I would say to Misty Hoyt, take a picture. Misty, Photography by Misty, is our photographer. And then we got Jeff Crilly down there and Chris Gambria. They do all of our videos. In a normal meeting, we'd be interviewing the speaker before the meeting and posting that interview. And also today we have Holden our producer back on the board in the back at one of Jeff Crilly's 5 studios. But I want to thank the team. I want to thank them very, very much. Dean Lindsay, Melanie Murph, Anya Zagan, Aaron Cook with Marriott Quorum, who puts up our out-of-town guests, and please support all of them as we go through. And Lucinda. Lucinda, how many people do we have in our LinkedIn group now? She's on mute. 2,770 and counting.
Oh,
And-
yes. Invite
Yes.
everybody around you to join our LinkedIn group.
She gets bossy if you don't join it. So everybody, please take a moment to join our LinkedIn company page, our LinkedIn group. We also have a LinkedIn company page, and we have Kathy Clatterbaugh out there that handles our Twitter. Kathy, thank you. You see the hashtags up on the screen. Please take a moment, say hi to people, tell them you're here, tell them you're having a great time, and tell them you're at the studios of Real News PR. Now that was named long before there was a fake news. And so Jeff Crilly, welcome us. This is your house we're in.
I'm so thrilled that we've been able to play host during this pandemic because I think our studios came together at just the right time when you needed a place with some gravitas to hold these meetings. So I was thrilled that we could jump in and lend a hand.
Well, yeah, I can't tell you how much it's appreciated, and I can't tell you how much fun it is to look out and say, and the traffic on the LBJ freeway, Interstate 635, is very light this morning. There seems to be a slight mist in the air. Oh, I'm sorry, we'll get to the weather later. But the traffic is, we're sitting on the 4th floor of One Lincoln Center at the intersection of LBJ and the North Dallas Tollway in one of 5 studios at this location. And then if you go over to Lincoln Center 2, there's 2 more studios, and he's building 3 more. And this is just, if you've not been to Real News PR, Jeff Crilly's, just call him up, come take a tour. Unbelievable studios.
Thank you.
And just unbelievable, and an unbelievable team. I got to tell you about his team. He's got 23 people. All of them have come out of broadcast journalism, not a school, not somebody that just wants to try to do this. And I think his last hire was the producer for 8 years of Good Morning Texas. So you're with a staff that's highly professional. Now there are 2 that didn't come out of that world. His Dallas Crilly and Sarah Crilly, but they grew up on his knee, kids, in the newsroom. So they probably know more than
They
most
probably
of the people. But this is Real News PR. We're in the Anchor Desk studios. And Jeff, I can't thank you enough for all the things you've done to help us over the years. And he also has a book, Free Publicity. And if you want to read a great book, that's a great book. And it's a fun book. I gave that to the publisher of the Dallas Business Journal on a Friday. He called me on Sunday. This was Huntley Payton. Many of you remember him. And he said, Bill, I want to thank you for ruining my weekend. I said, what are you talking about? He said, I've read the book twice and I should have written it. So what an endorsement for a book.
Thank you.
But Jeff, thank you. And if you're down in Highland Park Village, by the way, his beautiful wife runs all the marketing for Highland Park Village. And she's been tasked with the turnaround job of all the new faces, all the new things at Highland Park Village. So the family's quite out and about.
Thank you.
We thank you so much. Okay, in the news, we will be doing a Lincoln Experience Happy Hour, and it will be sponsored by CloudX and Mike Rochelle. CloudX is a multiple cloud solution integrator. They specialize in delivering rapid digital transformation, advanced analytics solutions, and so many more things. But I want to thank Mike Rochelle. We're working with Ford Motor Company. Many of you don't realize, some of you know, some of you don't, that we gave away 2 tickets to every Cowboy game. And the Lincoln Experience and Lincoln Motor Company approached us to do that. We were going to have a happy hour in October with some Cowboys at the Lincoln Experience for all those that had a test drive and other things. What you may not realize that everybody that did a test drive from Success North Dallas received a $50 gift certificate to the Fan Experience, which is the Cowboy shop at the Star. So it was a great relationship. Looks like we're talking about doing it again next year. Also, we're going to have happy hours at Bavette Grill, which is a new grill in Lincoln Park and restaurant owned by the people that own Estelio Gaucho Steakhouse. And we'll be doing one at the Virgin Hotel. And I'm really excited about that. The Virgin has approached us to bring our crew down into the design district. And having done several things and events there, this is really going to be special as well. So if you're not on our mailing list, you won't know about it. So take a moment, sign up, successnorthdallas.com, sign up for our emails to stay in the know. And we really look forward to having you as a part of Success North Dallas. We started our young executives roughly 2 years ago. And Jan, I know you were at their latest board meeting. Would you bring us up to date?
Yes, hey, thank you. That's the Success North Dallas Young Executives. They have a great board. They're doing some phenomenal things. They're scheduling all these meetings coming up for their lunch and learns, having great attendance to it. We've got special pricing for new Success North Dallas Young Executives for the first year of $245. So if any of you have anybody in your company you want to sponsor, get them in there, have them contact Young Executives at Success North Dallas. Got a great board headed up by Shelby Blevins now this year. She's president. And Shelby, why don't you tell us what's coming up?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate you guys. Just wanted to tell you guys a little bit about our upcoming event, which will be tomorrow. We have a lunch and learn via Zoom. It's free. Please, everyone come. We would love to have you. We have Randy Mayu coming. Hi, Randy, one of S&D's own. So excited to have you. So he's going to be talking about forming healthy habits. You know, we all have habits that need to be broken, let's be honest. And so Randy's going to be talking about the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. We're really excited. It's going to be a great discussion over lunch. Please, everyone, it is free to sign up and join. And if you want to, just go ahead and pop me in the chat if you have any questions about it. Myself or Kirsten is on as well. But yeah, if just SNDYE as a whole, If you're interested in being a part of it, if you're interested in being a member, a mentor even, I mean, we're very open to having anyone participate. So please feel free to message me here, chat me, and we'll get connected. Thank you guys.
So young means young at heart, and they do need mentors. So if you're interested in that, and I personally have mentored 35 juniors to doctoral candidates, and it's some of the greatest experiences and relationships of my life have come out of that. I also want to make notice of the storm we've had. We talked about it, but a lot of people were displaced. A lot of people are still displaced. A lot of offices are displaced. I know our boardroom ceiling at the start crashed through in one of the companies I'm consulting with. And so there are many things going on like that. But we have two members in Success North Dallas, City Central, that hosts the offices for Success North Dallas. And secondly, Venture X at Castle Hills. Mark Berg of City SEA at Venture X at Capitol Hills. They both have office space. They'd love to talk to you and see how they could possibly help you out. If you're in need of that, please reach out to them. I think you'll find both places wherever whatever's convenient for you. Venture X is in Castle Hills. City Central has East Plano, Addison, West Plano, and downtown, and one in Fort Worth, just by the park in downtown Fort Worth. So these people have stepped up. They're offering to help. If you need their help, just reach out to Mark Berg or SEE or just to me, or go to our website. You can find their contact information there. If you're looking for a place to host a podcast, I know this not necessarily free, but if you're getting in the podcast, well, you should call him, because he's got some deals for our members.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question about that. I want to thank our partner members. Our partner members are people that have come alongside of us when we turned 35, 25. I'm already trying to get us to 35. I love that. When we turned 25, and they came alongside of us financially to help us keep the costs down and a way for us to continue this on another 25 years. Thus, why we formed the Young Executives. And I have to say something else about the Young Executives. Who would call up Craig Hall and say, I know you're friends with Bill Wallace and would like to have our meeting in your boardroom. And so they call up Craig Hall, they have their first meeting in their boardroom, in his boardroom. Then he does a wine tasting. I mean, I'm so proud of these young people, I can't even begin to tell you. And they are the people that will be filling these slots. They're the people that will be sitting in this chair and in Jan's chair as we go into the next 50 years or however long it may be. So Cancer Treatment Centers of America, they don't even have a hospital here. Their North Texas population went up 1% in their first 6 months. Baker Tilly, former MCG, phenomenal people, phenomenal CPA and accounting firm. They're the entrepreneur's godfather, the entrepreneur's accounting firm. It's unbelievable. CPA and wealth management. Texas Legends. Malcolm, are you out there? I hope you are. I don't see you, but I can't see everybody on the screen. But we have a great relationship with the Texas Legends. They're not playing this season. This is the NBA D League or G League, the developmental league for the Mavericks. They're not playing this season, but yet they are. They're out in the community every single day, doing things, helping out in the community, creating events, and it's almost like they are having a season. So Texas Legends, we love you, we thank you. Dallas Business Journal, Phil Barnett, Barnett Energy. Phil was the first one that believed in us. He wrote the first check. And when I was holding his check for $10,000, and I thought to myself, this is really going to work. And because of Phil and some others, it really has worked. And of course, Real News PR, Jeff, I can't thank you enough. ISSA Charities, Debbie R. Sardone, Debbie McAdams, ISSA Charities are the charity wing of, well, I said that wrong. Cleaning for a Reason is the charity wing of ISA. And ISSA is the Cleaning Association International, the largest in the world, who are setting all of the standards for the gets-togethers, the cities, the AT&T Stadium, American Airlines Center. They are setting the standards that will keep us safe. And they're out of Chicago. But yet again, they're still a partner member. Our newest one, our second newest, Ben Istar, Mia Spa, Marie Diaz, and Denise Nolan. Then Work Innovators, Essie Lee, and Essie also owns VentureX. Pinnacle Graphics, Chris Hill, 25 years ago, he started his company, sitting at a table at Success North Dallas. Tom Neeson, Acuity Systems, City Central, Mark Berg. We can't thank you enough, Mark. And by the way, I was just at his location just right before the freeze down at, if you know where, down at the Crescent in their newest location. It is absolutely fabulous. You should visit their locations. Fox Rothschild, Clint David, thank you. They just renewed again as partner members. RP1, Brad Parnell, our website. Brad, we thank you. And now CFO, Jennifer Lane, and Miraplex. Miraplex was acquired, merged with Preferred Technology Solutions. And they're an IT solution. They specialize in managed IT services, as well as cyber and physical security. They're here for your technology needs, and an unbelievable group of people. Neil, we thank you so very much for the work you've done in and around Success North Dallas. So ladies and gentlemen, this is how we applaud. This is how we give a standing ovation by this, because this is a standing ovation. And it's very simple. We applaud these people, and we thank you very much. And I do a quote every month, and I try to tie that quote in to the speaker, to the current events, to what's going on. But I was on a call last week with Trump's former Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy and the Environment. The guy also founded DocuSign, and before that, Ariba Networks. And we were having a great conversation, but he said this when asked how he was successful with DocuSign: out-focus them, out-think them, and out-produce them. And that's Keith Crotch. And after he said that, he said, there's always a hole in something. There's always a place that you can out-focus them, out-think them, out-produce them. Now go find it and do it. And that's how we built DocuSign. We found the real estate market. And the real estate market we embraced with every ounce of our being. And who knows, they embraced us back. It's much like my business was, when I retired from the insurance business, 90% of my business was coming out of Success North Dallas, because I brought people there to our meetings to meet other people. And they started bringing people there to meet me. And this is how it works. And this is how you can use Success North Dallas as well. So ladies and gentlemen, with that quote, I want to slide into our speaker today. I met our speaker through Ronnie Spellman. And then one of his compatriots, Ellen Houlihan, joined Success North Dallas. And she's actually in studio with us to make sure that our speaker does what he's supposed to do. I think she's the gatekeeper of our speaker. But our speaker is Stephen A. Ingalls. He joined Catalyzer in 2010 and later served as its president from 2011 to 15. And now he leads the company as president and CEO. Prior to joining Catalyzer, he led and directed operations from climate research. He couldn't find a place in the US to do it, so he went to Antarctica and Greenland. Then he coordinated attack helicopter deployments throughout the US. I did say attack helicopter deployments throughout the US, Europe, Korea, an 82 graduate of West Point, Lieutenant Colonel retired. Ingalls holds a Master's of Science in Engineering Management, a Master of Military Art and Science, a Master's of Science in Aerospace Engineering. He won the NASA American Society of Engineering Educators Fellowship to, of course, the Johnson Manned Spacecraft Center, where he analyzed the next generation of space shuttles, the ones that have been flying our citizens all over space. Leaving active duty in 2004, he transitioned from his uniform and took that experience to his business, supporting manufacturing projects and management functions at an architectural millwork firm in Kansas City, then as associate director for administration for the National Science Foundation, multiple federal contracting organizations, and finally his full-time role at Catalyzer. Today, as we've heard, some of you that were on earlier, his greatest joys are his marriage to Kara, mentoring his children into adulthood. Some of us could use some of that. And serving gleefully as Elijah and Adeline's grandfather. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Lieutenant Colonel Stephen A. Ingalls, retired, to Success North Dallas.
Thanks, Bill.
Steve, we're glad you're here.
I'm tickled to be here too.
And Ronnie and Ellen, thank you so much for the introduction, the lunch. This is unbelievable.
Well, I was in Atlanta, driving toward the airport, and Ronnie called and he says, "I've just left a breakfast with these people, and you've got to get involved." So I said, all right. I got to a place where I could do something about it, and I enrolled us immediately. And it said, Ellen lives in Allen. She lives here in town, so Ellen can be our proxy and participate. And so thanks to Ronnie for that call. And so we've been now participating in this program for a couple of years. So it was a really, really interesting introduction. Ronnie had been in Texas not very long after coming here from Virginia. And like I said, just serendipity that we're here.
It was, and it's serendipity too, that even though we're remote, we're virtual, Steve flew in from Kansas City for the meeting, so we could be at Jeff Crilley's studios.
Well, that's true. So yeah, Success North Dallas drove me here. I will tell you, we do business development around the country and take a number of trips. We spent a lot of time in Atlanta last year. But when we got to Dallas, there's a different dynamic in North Texas, and there's a different dynamic around Dallas that you can feel. And I say all that to say this: we've abandoned, not that I'm fond of Atlanta because that's where I went to graduate school. But there's a different feel in Texas. And so Ronnie has been a very, very excellent partner and champion for us. And Ellen's presence here. We are very, very busy when we get to Texas. So as I shared with you, we got here yesterday around 10:30, and I went to bed at 10:30 last night, and we went from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. So I'm excited for this. So
We're excited to have you.
And I've got to let the audience in on a little behind the scenes. It's the first time that Bill and I have ever had to sit on pillows because he's so tall. I mean, how tall are you?
I'm 6'4".
6'4". Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we weren't sitting on pillows right now, it would look like we were your kids.
But he's
So-
still taller than us.
He still is. He's a very. I can see why you're a born leader.
Well,
people look up to
It's
tall people.
we'll talk about that. It's is there, and the kind of the bit of the movie trailer is, in this more virtual world, is there a change in the leadership archetype from commanding a room to commanding a space? How do we do that differently these days? When you walk into a room and you have your shoulders squared and you're a large physical presence, that's one thing, and you're kind of given the benefit of the doubt. But how do you do that in this medium? So we'll get to that when we get toward the end of this discussion about the implications for a virtual world.
Perfect.
So, well, good. Well, I'm going to jump right into this, and Jan's put the title slide up for me, and I appreciate that. There's some terms on here that I promise that we'll define, and I promise you also that you probably read, like I do, Harvard Business Review or McKinsey Quarterly or MIT or Korn Ferry, and there are lots and lots of words that are bandied about. One of my frustrations is that nobody ever tells you how to do anything with what it is that they're writing about. We like to be able to translate those topics into practice. So to walk into an organization and talk about agile implementation, it's kind of frustrating because we often think that it may just be applicable to an IT setting, but it's not. So Bill and I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and he asked me what's on your mind, and we arrived at these things that we're going to walk through, and I'm going to try to get through this relatively quickly, only because I'm really interested in some questions and some exchange with you when we get to the end of this conversation. But it's a VUCA world. In fact, one of the things that you'll realize, although it's maybe a new term to you, is that we've been living in it for a very, very long time. It's just a different way to frame and think about it that I hope is helpful as you're trying to deal with what my wife would describe as this mess around us. It's always been messy. We just know more about it these days. Agile is in the news everywhere. It's a concept that that evolved out of some frustrated IT developers in about 2001 when they took a retreat to Utah, and it's now gotten tons of traction in business for other applications beyond IT. We're talking about teamwork, so there are some nuances to developing teams, and I'll give away my secret is, putting people in the same space does not a team make. There's extra stuff required, and that extra thing that I would tell you is necessary for a group of individuals to translate to a team is trust. So how is trust different when it's practiced virtually? And then some last things are really thought prompters that I'd like you to think about. And I'll just give you an example. Our communication skills, when we're practicing them face-to-face, and I have to be careful about face-to-face because we're face-to-face now, but when we're physically co-located, we practice communications differently than when we are virtually communicating with one another. And so just as an example, whatever we learned about interpersonal skills, we need to take a step back and think about how those need to be practiced in a blended workforce environment or in a slightly different world where we're spending more time in medium like this than we would be if we were sitting in the room. So we'll get through all of that, but I want to jump into VUCA, and I'm really kind of interested, if you would, help me understand what your background with VUCA might be. Is there anybody that does know something about the term and where it comes from? Yeah, Randy, thank you. Help me. You're muted, sir.
I do book synopses, and I did a book quite a few years ago, Get There Early, and that's where I was introduced to VUCA. And so I have done a number of presentations where I talk about the VUCA world. It is, to me, a very usable phrase, and each of the 4 words, I'm sure you're going to elaborate, are very significant in understanding this very changing world. So I'm a big fan of VUCA.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's interestingly, it evolved from around the time of the dissolution of the Soviet Union. So this is the early 90s, based on some thought by Warren Bennis in the late 80s and others. But what happened is that in the dissolution of the Soviet Union is we suddenly went from a bipolar world where we could all kind of face east and say the bad guys are over there. And now the Soviet Union is gone, and we're trying to think about how we would strategize operating in a world where there's not an obvious threat and where the threats are everywhere. So thinkers at the Army War College came up with this notion of a VUCA environment. They probably didn't originate the thinking. There are some, as I said, Warren Bennis, the late 80s. But they have evolved this, and it's become extremely prominent in military circles when we're talking about strategy development. And I have seen it pop up now in business journals much more frequently. And yet, when I look it up, there are some helpful places to go look about it. I would tell you Harvard Business Review talks the most about VUCA of any business journal collective that I'm aware of. Some of that information is really, really good. Some of it not quite so helpful. And as I like to say, the answers to whatever you're trying to work on are not in those business journals. That's just hints. and tactics. The answers are in your head. You just need to be inspired to come up with them. So do some reading and research. But let's talk about that. Jan, if you go to the next slide, let's define it. So it's 4 elements. And as is the case with the military, it's an acronym, VUCA. And these statements are extracted from a book by Eric Shinseki. Eric Shinseki was formerly the Army Chief of Staff. He wrote a book some years later. This is about the time that he was the Secretary of the Veterans Affairs, which did not go so well for him. But nonetheless, he wrote a really good book based on the Army's leadership model, which we referred to as Be No Do. He co-authored that book with a woman named Frances Hesselbein. If you're not familiar with Frances Hesselbein, you should be. She is a preeminent leader in the United States. She is one of the former executives for the Girl Scouts of America, resurrected that organization from almost its dissolution, but is one of the great thinkers on leadership in the country and does not nearly get the credit that she deserves. But they talked about VUCA in these terms. So volatility, and I'll just give you a couple of examples. Change is no longer gradual and predictable. And what's interesting about it is when we're talking about, when we're in business school or we're in graduate school, we're thinking about operating a business. Nobody, to my experience, few people will tell us that the world doesn't work in a predictable way of patterns that we can apply those business models we're learning to. And yet we walk out into the world and the first thing that we do is we wake up and the towers are coming down. Or, you know, I was in Ohio last year in mid-March and everybody's talking about this thing called COVID. I arrived at a very, very busy Monday in central Ohio, having gone through the Atlanta airport. I counted 2 people wearing masks that day, 2 out of the thousands of people that I interacted with. By the end of the week, I left. The president had a significant press conference on that Friday where he had pulled out the drug leaders, drug manufacturing leaders, pharma leaders in the country and talked about the country's response to COVID. I watched the stock market spike during that same press conference by about 1,000 points in the course of 90 minutes. And by the time that I left through Detroit at the end of the week, there was nobody in the terminal. Nobody. That's VUCA. That's volatility. And I want to make sure that I'm clear in, we're not talking about the strict financial definition of volatility. We're talking about just the way that the world now unfolds to us. It's no longer gradual and predictable. Uncertainty. And uncertainty gets to the point that there are no crystal balls, or there never were, but there are far fewer crystal balls than there used to be that allow us in the face of this volatility to understand and anticipate what's coming next. Let's just think about the ice storm last week, right? So you could see the storm coming. That weather had been predicted for several days, but we were all uncertain about the degree to which it might affect us. We were all uncertain how long that blackout might last in our homes and what the impact might be as the lights went out. And that uncertainty is very, very anxiety heavy. It produces significant frustration in my household for my spouse, who asks me almost every morning, are we ever going to stop wearing masks? And depending on who you listen to, their answer is as volatile as, yesterday, yes, today, no, tomorrow, double mask, next week, who knows? But uncertainty is in our face. The complexity element describes the manner in which the world is so interdependent. The things that might happen, well, I'll just give you an example. So I booked a hotel when I was coming to Dallas to visit. I booked a hotel and got the hotel. 3 days later, I learned that my hotel had been canceled. I got a note from the hotel saying that I need to schedule a new hotel. And I thought, well, it's pipes. And of course it was, the pipes had burst, the utility systems were out. But as I was talking with the National Reservation Desk, they also shared that many people, because they had no power or utilities at their home, were vacating their homes and going to these hotels. So the interdependency of the storm to hotel occupancy was not something that I anticipated. It's because of the complexity of these systems with each other. I got to Love Field yesterday. Went to my car. I had my Avis app. So my Avis app tells me I'm supposed to go to position J6 and get in this white Toyota Camry with a Washington license plate. I get to the Camry and I try to open the door. They're typically sitting in the lot unlocked. And as I tried to open the door's locked, which was rather uncommon. And the next thing that I experienced was somebody sitting in the car, rolling the window down, telling me that he had the car. And his bags were in the car. I learned from Avis that the water going out had slowed their ability to turn cars, had produced demand on cars. It had overwhelmed the computer system. And so the computer system was simply linking humans with whatever car they could find in their inventory. These are examples of the complexity. The things that we do, it's not quite as straightforward as, the butterfly that flits its wings on the other side of the earth is felt here, but there's an element of that that's affected via VUCA. And lastly, ambiguity. And the ambiguity is that there is in a VUCA environment often multiple answers to the same questions. Now, multiple answers to the same questions, I'm an engineer by trade, so I like multiple answers to the same questions. However, there's an element of psychology and decision-making that suggests when we're faced with multiple answers to the question, it does have an impact of paralyzing us in decision-making. And we are hesitant to choose one because we want to be optimal. We want to choose the best. And we have multiple. Well, it's not always the case in VUCA. So that's essentially what it is. I'm hoping that as we go through this, if you've got questions or comments or about what we're talking about, or if anything's been unclear, that you'll pull that in the chat. And Jan, I'll count on you to help me, or Lucinda to help me stop and address that as we're going, because we're going to kind of build on this as we go. So I want to make sure we have fair foundation. All right, let's go to the next slide. So let's talk about what the impacts are. For volatility, there is a word that I think is important, and we all of us individually have different affect tolerances. And that's a psychological term. It means that we all experience and tolerate emotions differently. And again, my wife and I will be married 39 years this year. I am continually surprised by her in the face of the post-pandemic world. And she is excited by littler things than she used to be. It's her affect tolerance is at play. It's driven us to have different kinds of conversations. You may at work in your businesses, you may be seeing things you may be seeing people more prickly about certain things given the enhanced volatility around them, and you can't actually put your finger on it. Well, it's the different affect tolerances that we're all applying to the emotions and circumstances around us. This volatility, the impact is it's also distracting us. What I watched in March and April is I watched strategic leaders move away from what I thought was important strategic thinking about their organizations, and they started paying attention to tactical things, to little teeny weeny things that in the big scheme of things didn't matter. But I was so focused on dealing with this sense of volatility around me that I needed something that I could control. So my wife is an example, and she's going to cringe that I use her for so many examples, but nonetheless, it's a good example. So we went to our response to social distancing was we started using Instacart, the Walmart pickup, and the Target pickup. Well, in my wife's circumstance, if it's a 1 to 2 p.m. pickup at Target, we're there at 1 p.m. We're not there at 12:59, and we're not there at 1:01. We're there at 1 p.m. letting them know we're in the slot ready for pickup. That's missing the bigger picture for the tactical element, and I'm sure that you've seen that unfold in some of your own organization. So here's the problem, leaders, is that you got to back yourself out of that. And I know for guys like me, it's easy to say you just got to do this, you just got to do that, but you must be present to win. If you think that your folks are good, and we'll talk to this later, if you think your folks are good, now more than ever is the time to check in on them. And we are, by social distancing and blended workforces, we are struggling to connect with our workforces because we simply don't wander down the hall and stick our head in their offices or poke our faces over their cubicles anymore. They nonetheless need that leader presence. It is one of the most significant impacts to work-related and general well-being reported by Harvard Business Review on the 10th of February. One of the most significant impacts is trust and confidence and presence of leaders in their workforce's lives. So leaders, you got to be present. With uncertainty, the thing that we often try to do is we see something that's unfamiliar to us, and so we're naturally inclined to try to morph it into a framework that we better understand. So we're trying to shove the square peg of the VUCA world into a round hole, and it doesn't work that way. And it causes us, I think, to overlook broader possibilities. I'm going to talk about mourners and stormers later. This was an article that was published a couple of weeks ago that again got my attention. Is mourners are going to think about, they're going to miss the opportunity because they're thinking about, when are we going to get back to normal? Well, this is not anything you all don't know. Normal changed. Normal will continue to change. We're not going back to a normal. We have a different kind of normal. If you want some way to frame it other than, we're operating in these unprecedented times or the new normal, I would tell you to look up the term, the Overton window. The Overton window is a manner in which political frameworks evolve as the context around those frameworks evolve. We are in a new Overton window. So our thinking, our approach to business and life needs to follow in that new frame. We tend in an uncertain environment to only think in extremes. It's either we think that the world is going to hell or everything will ultimately be all right. And when we consider that for a minute, the reality is that very few things in life are that binary. This is going to be a disaster. I mean, I can again see my family or my businesses. This is going to be a disaster, or this is going to work out great. There are all shades of success or disaster in between those two extremes. So it's important that we continue to think about the fact that the world doesn't work in extremes like that. There are lots of different ways that things can turn out. Complexity, and I apologize, these have run in just a little bit together. Complexity. What we do with complexity is we tend to try to process away the problem. So if we're dealing with something that seems a little bit goofy, what we'll do is we'll go into somebody's office and we'll say, we need a new process for this, or we need to do this. Complexity in our organizations is also, I think, unveils the Peter Principle more quickly. As the world starts to become more and more and more complex, those humans that we have counted on for some time may at some point be less capable of dealing with that complexity than they once were. So how do we do that? The the notion is stop trying to make it, stop saying it depends, stop saying it's complex. Of course it's complex. We just have to do some thinking about it to deal with the complexity. This relates back to the quote that Bill showed. We got to think about this stuff and then do it. And the thing that you might say is a good thing about social distancing is I found that I had more time to think, which was productive. Well, we're now getting back into this. Let's start charging things back up again. We have managed to fill our calendars with Zoom calls from morning to night. We've managed to fill every white space nugget with something because it helps us feel productive. Leaders feel productive when they solve problems and help their subordinates. That's what I believe as a servant leader. I neglected to mention the red teaming nugget. This is dealing with uncertainty, and red teaming may be a concept that you're familiar with, but let me go back to that for a second. Red teaming is simply organized alternative perspectives. So if you're trying to figure out how to deal with uncertainty, Einstein said it best, don't solve problems with the same brain that created them. So find some different brains. And red teaming is very, very popular in the military and law enforcement and IT. As an example, in IT, what you would do is if you're trying to test out some code that you may have written, you're going to put a red team together that's going to attack that code, both from an outside cyber threat perspective, but also from an insider user perspective. And I want to try to break it. They're going to try to break whatever it is that you think is a solution. The military does that with operational plans, is we build a red team and the red team will come and try to break the plan, do something we don't expect. And I will tell you the source for those red teams is not the typical places in your businesses. Find those people that you wouldn't think to ask and involve them in that red teaming and tell them that you want them to break something that you think is a pretty good product. They'll figure it out. And if they can't, you know that you probably got a good product. Down to ambiguity very quickly. Ambiguity is, I just don't know which way we're going to go. As I said, you have multiple solutions. It's difficult to identify the threats and opportunities until it's too late. And what we'll tend to do is we'll tend to try to deal with the ambiguity by just creating a lot of things to do. And we don't ultimately address it. So here's the solution. There is a concept that those of you in law enforcement will know well, or maybe even those of you that have anything to do with use of force would know well, and that's a concept called the OODA loop. Think of it as a decision-making process, for lack of a better way to describe it. I remember you called out a law enforcement expert on here. I'm sure that they know something about OODA loops. Who was that you?
I don't think he's on the call. He's
Okay.
Up in Montana. right now.
Okay. All right, great. Anybody familiar with OODA loops? And Randy, you've already got your check for today, so I'm not going to ask you to help me.
It's a breakfast cereal, isn't it?
It could be.
Oodle Loops.
That's exactly what I was gonna say. Isn't that got something to do with Fred Flintstone?
Anybody?
Yeah,
Lance.
yeah. The OODA loop is a decision-making process. I think Colonel John Boyd was the founder of it. He was a pilot, and it has to do with assessing, acting, and the acronym, and I can't remember exactly the OODA. And it's a loop, and the faster you go through that cycle, the
Right.
more effective you are in that process.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So John Boyd, you mentioned him. Colonel John Boyd was a fighter pilot in both the Korean War and in Vietnam. He had something to do with the design of the F-15, the F-16, and the A-10. But he is probably better well known as having been an air-to-air combat theorist. He is somebody that talked about the difference between energy and speed in terms of air-to-air combat. So if you put yourself in the position of dogfighting two airplanes, I need to assess what's going on around me. I need to orient to that threat. I need to decide what I'm going to do, and then I need to act. That's where the OODA loop came from. And I need to do that on the order of nanoseconds. And I'm going to do it importantly with incomplete information. So if you're waiting for all the data to come in, you're going to be the victim in that air-to-air engagement, much more so than you're going to be the victor. So observe is what the first O is, observe. Here's the important point about the observe is you have to observe with an open mind, because you're maybe seeing something that you've never seen before. If you think you've seen it all, whenever you see it, you may miss the whole thing and you're going to be screwed up from the get-go. So observe, and it's got to be with an open mind. Pretend as if you've never seen it. The next O is what military theorists and anybody that speaks German will know what I'm talking about. The next is observe, orient. And the orient in the OODA loop is the Schwerpunkt, the primary point of the OODA loop. And here's what we need to do with the observe, is we want to take the problem and we want to tear it apart into bite-sized chunks, and we want to apply our different problem-solving methodologies to the bite-sized chunks. And then once we've done that for the bite-sized chunks, then we put it back together in a new creative solution, amalgamation of a problem that has never been solved before. And how do we do that? Well, one of the ways that you can become really, really good at decision-making and problem-solving in a VUCA environment is to develop a whole portfolio of mental models. So I will tell you, everybody that's on Success North Dallas has a different way of solving problems, whether it's from your experience or from your industry. You've learned them someplace. I'm a 22-year Army veteran. And so I learned problem solving via the Army. I'm also a trained engineer. I learned problem solving, the scientific problem solving methodology. But the most enlightening approach to problem solving that I've ever been exposed to was from a general back in probably 1988. A two-star general was telling us about coaching his children. He had two kids that were graduating from college. Both were entering the Army. And they called and said, "Dad, what advice would you give us as we start our military careers?" Now, this is a little off the normal. He said, "Your number one objective in your military careers is to be more creative." What? How do I do that? I mean, they're going to walk into an office with a guy like me and they're going to say, "Hey, boss, I want to be more creative." And I'm going to say, "Yes, and I would like you to breathe regularly as well. So tell me how you do that. What does that mean?" And he gave an example that sticks to me to this day. Here's the way that you build some additional problem-solving methodologies. He coached his children to go to the opera. He coached his children to go to art museums. And he said, think about it this way. A piece of sheet music was concocted from a mental model of composing at some point hundreds of years ago, flew into the brain of whoever it was, the composer, and that music then was translated into a two-dimensional sheet of paper with notes and a construct for writing music. That music has now flowed through decades and generations of humans, and it shows up on the podium in the concert hall in your local city. And there's a conductor that's going to step to the podium and put their baton in the air, and they're going to translate that two-dimensional sheet of music now into sound waves that are going to propagate through the theater in a way that will move humans to tears. That's problem solving. So I would encourage you to expand your approach to problem solving and build more mental models. That's the way that you negotiate the OODA loop. Go to the theater if you don't. Go to the opera if you don't. Sit in an airport and watch humans get their bags off a carousel. That's a problem-solving methodology. Look for those kinds of approaches to solving problems everywhere you are, which means we got to lift our heads out of our smartphones and our devices. We got to pay attention. But those problem-solving methodologies are everywhere around us. It's uncharacteristic. I'm an engineer. I grew a love of the arts. I've gone to art museums, been on art boards, and when I tell people that, after having shared that I'm a former attack helicopter pilot, it seems incongruous. But I want to have multiple problem-solving methodologies available to me. So in this loop, observe with an open mind, orient. The only way we will successfully orient is to have a bunch of different mental models that help us problem solve. And then the last two pieces of this are really straightforward. I'm going to have to decide, and I can't wait for perfect knowledge. The world is never going to give me perfect knowledge. So get comfortable with a 70 to 80% solution. Try it and go. This is going to come back when we talk a little bit about Agile. Try it and go. And then you're going to OODA loop all over again. But John Boyd, brilliant thinker. OODA loop is a technique that leaders should apply to the ambiguity in our world these days. So I want to transition themes, but I'm going to pause for just a second. And Jan, if there's anything that comes up in the chat that we should talk about before we move on to Agile, I'd appreciate that.
Well, we had one comment here that I think is pretty cool, Steve. And let me get to it over here. Came from one of our listeners. She said, so inspired by the speakers, prior military and have been given missions to accomplish at least minute and at the last minute have used these processes. Didn't even know they existed, but love the definitions. Expand your knowledge so that you can perform in just about any situation.
Good. Excellent. All right. So if the world is changing rapidly, thank you for that, by the way. If the world is changing rapidly, how is it that we ought to approach our strategic development, our problem solving? One of the ways I would argue is with this notion of Agile. Now, Agile flew, as I said, out of the brains of some IT developers in February 2001. Jan, you can go to the volatility screens Agile slide if you wouldn't mind. It's the Agile Manifesto. If you Google the Agile Manifesto, you can read it. And ultimately, it says something to this effect. We used to develop software in what's referred to as a waterfall methodology. So we would set a specification, we would develop the software, we would get it developed, then we would test it at the very end against the specification, and we would launch that product, and then we would move on to an evolution of 1.0 or 2.0 or whatever. As the computer environment began to expand, software could no longer be developed that way. By the time that you got from the specification to the first iteration, the world had changed. The computer hardware had changed already that made the software obsolete. So these thinkers went off and they said, here's what we need to do is we need to approach this from take much smaller bites is the way I'll describe it. And we need the leadership to get the hell out of the way. Of course, that's what a bunch of IT developers that go off to the Wasatch Mountains in Utah would say. But I think it applies here. If it's volatile, if it's changing very rapidly, I mean, I'll just say this, and I'll try to summarize. You can see the words on the slide, and I'm sure that that Bill and Jan will get the slides to you if you want. If you're trying to deal with a world that is changing very quickly, what happened on the middle of March to your strategic plan that you developed the previous fall? What happened? Did you go back and readdress it? Or did you just leave it sitting there gathering dust on your bookshelf and say, we'll get to it next year? Because that's also a response to VUCAs. We'll say, well, if the world truly is this way, why don't we just throw all the planning out and respond to it as we encounter it? Bad idea. If you do that, you have no plan. You have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. You have no idea what you're giving up in order to respond to whatever it is that is now in your face. So my argument is that we ought to adopt a better approach, a more agile approach to our problem solving methodology. So think about it like this. In my company, rather than an annual approach to what we're going to accomplish this year, we're going to accomplish it in quarters. And you think, oh my God, 4 strategic discussions a year? Well, I'm not talking about getting deep into the conversation. I'm talking about where are we every quarter, reassessing and setting new strategic goals. What I had planned to do on January 1st of 2020 is not what I planned to do by April 1st of 2020. And yet I failed to go back and even address that. So my point is, dealing with the volatility, stop trying to write a 3-year strategic plan. That's my advice. Now, somebody's going to want to take me on that, and that's okay. But if the world isn't predictable and changing slowly, how is it that a 3 to 5 year strategic plan is going to have any validity after a certain period of time? Take smaller bites. And I'll put a pause. There's some other things that are in this slide. I stole a chunk of this on the left-hand side. McKinsey and Company speak the most about Agile of the outlets. I said that Harvard Business Review speaks the most about VUCA. But if you want to know something about Agile, one of the best books I think you can read is a book called The Unicorn Project. Now, typically, if I've ever been involved in interviewing an IT hire, I get into the first question and then another language pops out and I have no idea what they're talking about. And so I fake it until I get through the interview. And so I'm not an IT guy. The Unicorn Project is an IT focused book. I will tell you though, it's a parable and it's written so engagingly that it was a story that, although about IT, I got through and couldn't wait to turn the next page. And they'll never mention Agile once in that book, but it's all about Agile. It's a contrasting approach to developing some software in an auto parts company. One of them is Agile, one of them is not. You'll pick up on it right away. So I would encourage you to think about that. And if you want to learn a little bit more about Agile, that's the best book that I've read lately. All right, let's talk about trust very quickly, because I'm going to try to wrap here, and I'm going to give you the bottom lines. Trust is different when we're operating remotely. And if you're a fan of, if I ask somebody, do you trust me? And they say yes, then my next move typically is, well, I've always wanted to be a cardiothoracic surgeon, so why don't you lay down on this table and I'd like to practice. And that's not going to work really well. The response to do you trust me should be always to do what? In cardiothoracic surgery, you wouldn't trust me to do. And I think it speaks, the concept of trust is really, really useful, but it has to be deconstructed. So Stephen Covey, not Stephen Covey Sr., not the 7 Habits guy, but his son wrote a book that many of you probably read called The Speed of Trust. And he deaggregates trust into the combination of character and competence. And he further deaggregates character into the amalgamation of intent and integrity. So integrity is about your value system, and intent is a little bit about your politics. We know office politics. We don't know why Johnny might be hanging out with so-and-so. Why are they getting there? You see somebody sitting at lunch with a competitor of yours. You don't understand their intent for having that meeting. Maybe they're doing some soft intelligence on your behalf, but nonetheless you see them sitting there, you don't understand their intent. So it degrades your trust. On the other hand, the reason you don't trust me to perform cardiothoracic surgery on you is because I don't have the capability to do so. And so we don't trust people oftentimes because they just don't have the skill set. Many times we've done 360 assessments with people and they say, I don't trust so-and-so. It turns out when you get to the root cause of why I don't trust you, it's because you don't finish your assignments on time or show up to meetings when you should. These are the results that we demonstrate. So I find this construct really, really productive in dealing with how to build trust, because it's not just, I don't trust you. Now I can pull it apart and figure out surgically why I don't trust you, and I can address that. It's not your values, Steve, that I'm bothered by. It's your intent. Or it's not that, but the result that you gave me the last time that we had this conversation wasn't very good. Now, how does all that play to a virtual environment? A colleague of ours, Tammy Ogren, Dr. Tammy Ogren up in Kansas, did her PhD dissertation on the subject of trust in virtual teams. And here's what she said. When we are working face-to-face with humans, we typically give them the benefit of the doubt about trust and will make that decision in nanoseconds. When we are working virtually with humans, we can't assess them face-to-face, so we don't give them the benefit of the doubt. And our means for building trust when we're disconnected is by measuring their result, period. So if you're struggling with a blended workforce and a team, I would tell you that you're probably relying on that result and not spending enough time thinking about the human, but it's just our mind goes to the result. Trust is the elixir that makes a team go. Trust is what changes a group of humans into a team, and it's measured differently, assessed differently in a virtual environment. So that's the point I want to make there. Let's go to a last couple of things. New set of soft skills. I'm not going to belabor these. I had a company call me last year and they said, I want you to help me think through the future of work. And as I thought about it, the future of work is a big question, but it's not the biggest question. The biggest question is, what's the future of life? Because we maintain relationships differently than we used to. We practice our faith differently than we used to. We recreate and entertain ourselves differently than we used to. And yes, we work differently than we used to. That's a big question. What's the future of life in a post-pandemic world? And that is the VUCA environment that we're talking about, much better describing what's going on than maybe the old strategic concept of the Soviet Union and the United States and its allies. But there are some other big questions. Has the basic leadership archetype changed? And you walk into a room, you square your shoulders, like I said, and you're a large human, and people take you, they judge you almost immediately by how you carry yourself. How do we carry ourselves virtually? What is it now that allows us to determine whether and how someone is a good leader? Some of that stuff has not changed. I'm not saying that everything is changed, but as we're assessing one another in a virtual or remote environment, I think you need to be thinking about that differently. What does leadership look and feel like for a more virtual team? Communications is different. The way we practice emotional intelligence is different. The manner in which we hold one another accountable is different. In fact, I can't see you, so maybe it's only your results against which I can hold you accountable. And by the way, the accountability thing does not have to be the boogeyman. It can be, we're holding people accountable when we promote them, when we give them raises, when we give them jobs. Those are accountability exercises, not just giving them whoopings. So the skills development, all of those things that we learned and have practiced in an interpersonal setting, in an office setting, I would argue need to be rethought when we have a blended workforce, and we're headed there. Let's go to the last slide and then I'll wrap, and I'd love to take your questions. Some challenges for us all. Go to this next one. Okay. Harvard Business Review. And we probably bumped into people that say, hey, I kind of like this post-pandemic stuff, staying at home, social distancing. That's wonderful. What you need to know is that I think the workforce is in serious trouble. I think that there is a stress fissure coming that's going to rival post-traumatic stress disorder in our first responders, military, and law enforcement. And it's going to come this year or next year. You're going to start to see cracks in the workforce. 85% of individuals are reporting that their general well-being has declined post-pandemic. 89% are saying that their work well-being has declined in the post-pandemic. What do we do about that? You got to be present to win, leaders. You got to get into it with your folks and figure out who is suffering and is afraid to tell you about it. The war for talent just changed. I no longer have to sit. Lance, do you have your hand? Oh, Lance is talking. The war for talent just changed. The battlefield just changed. I no longer or less likely have to live where I work. So I could live in Montana and work in Dallas. So it complicated things. Those of us that thought we lived in a wonderful, thriving metropolitan community, or out in Western Colorado, where I have access to all of these wonderful outdoor activities, I can still live there, but that doesn't mean I got to work there anymore. It's different. So be careful with those that have portable skills that can work from anywhere. Watch for the mourners and stormers. Mourners are those that are waiting for the world to come back to the way it was, and they're not getting anything done. When will it all be over? It's not going to be over. It's going to be different, but it's not going to be over. Stormers, on the other hand, are looking for opportunity in what's going on. I can only imagine what Amazon was doing as social distancing started to shut us down. What Instacart was doing, what Grubhub was doing, what any of these folks. I watched a barbecue joint in Kansas City transition overnight to one of the most efficiently, effective, detailed curbside delivery systems I've ever seen in my life. That's being a stormer, curling up and waiting for the world to come back the way it was. I'm sorry, it's just not going to do it. And I wish to God leaders would stop talking like the world is ending. And so I'm going to beg you, in these unprecedented times, that's baloney. It's sucked this bad in the past, and we've gotten through it. So let's stop leading every sentence with "in these unprecedented times," because we're going to figure it out. It gets back to the quote Bill showed. We're going to figure it out and get on with it. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. I've really enjoyed watching your faces, but I'd love to have some questions.
And I need to apologize as the leader of my company. I'm being called away, so I'm going to slip off the anchor desk. And you made me hungry. I'm going to get myself a big bowl of OODA Loops and just feast. Thank you. It was
My
an
pleasure.
honor.
Nice to meet you, Jeff.
And we're going to do the Q&A after we kind of close the meeting.
Good.
So be thinking about your questions out there. I want to talk about a few upcoming things. And Steve, I want to say, first of all, thank you very, very much. Couple of things for you. While you're in Dallas, dinner for two at 12 Cuts. It's a
Oh, thank you.
Brazilian steakhouse.
Yay.
And I know you said you like steak.
I do.
So that will be good. And also this book. It's by Lee and Julie Colin. It's The Nature of Excellence. And it was first given to me by Colleen Barrett, the COO, president of Southwest Airlines, when she retired. It's what she gave to the board of directors. And it's quite a beautiful book. And it embodies a lot of the stuff that's going on today.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you, sir. So, ladies and gentlemen, Steve Ingalls. And coming up, I'm so excited. March the 17th, we are going back in person. We will be at Prestonwood Country Club. Our speaker will be Mitzi Perdue. We will also have a virtual element. So those of you that are not comfortable coming to the club, great. You can still join us. Mitzi Perdue, one side of her family is Perdue Chicken. The other side, her side, is Hilton Hotels. And in between the two is their passion, anti-trafficking. And it will be on anti-trafficking. Yes, Mitzi will touch on family transition of companies, which is our other hotspot and a beautiful book that she's written. I first met her at a family office conference, and now she's also a part of the Hero Club and Success and C-Suite, and now soon to be Success North Dallas. April 21st, a well-known name here, Kent Billingsley, entrepreneur to millionaire. I heard Kent speak. His story, his methodology is unbelievable. Check out his book, Entrepreneur to Millionaire, and he will be our April 21st speaker. And then May the 19th, you may have to come back to Dallas for this one. Commander Guy Snodgrass, retired. Top Gun instructor, Top Gun pilot, Top Gun's top 20 leadership lessons from the cockpit, a book he has written, unbelievable gentleman. Spent a long time on the phone with him. I've heard him speak. He actually spoke to the Hero Club, and he is engaging. He has a brilliant application of OODA loop and the theories involved behind it. He also has moved back to Dallas and has a security, well, it's Defense Analytics is his company. And he's now merged with a major national firm. And I can promise you, this will be one interesting talk. Coming up later this year, former Undersecretary of State, Keith Crotch, and many, many more. So stay on. If you're not on our email list, go to successnorthdallas.com and get on our email list, because this year is shaping up to be a year like no other. Can't top last year with everything that happened, but I think we can top a lot of things. Upcoming sponsored event. First off, Forming Healthy Habits. That's Randy Mayhew speaking to our young executives. And again, young executives, I can't tell you how proud I am of you. You notice the way they changed our logo colors to match what they're doing. I absolutely love it. And that is tomorrow at noon. Go to our website. You'll find a link there, and look forward to having you join us tomorrow at noon. On March the 5th, back to Randy Mayhew again. Randy, what's coming up on March the 5th at the First Friday Book Synopsis?
Thanks, Bill. And by the way, terrific speaker today, Steve. Thank you. I'm doing two books, one of them, Business Made Simple, presenting the synopsis of Business Made Simple by Donald Miller, a crash course on all of the elements of successful business. But the other book is a whopping new bestseller by Adam Grant. This is at least the third book I've done by him. It is called Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know by Adam Grant. It is going to be a provocative book for us to learn about. And those are the two books on March 5. It will be on Zoom. Watch my blog. Thank you, Bill.
One of the most effective uses of your time that I've ever experienced is the First Friday Book Synopsis. I always walk away better for it. I've even read the books beforehand, and I've gotten more out of the synopsis that Randy does and the handout that he gives you than the book itself. It's a fabulous use of your time. We've got several happy hours coming up. Again, we're going to do a couple of more virtual town halls. These will be strictly virtual meetings. We're going to do one on COVID, but we're going to do one on the impact on the hotel, the entertainment industry, and what's going on, and how the vaccine is going to help in that manner. So stay tuned for that. I also want to mention something that's not on this, and it's the 5-day challenge. The 5-day credibility challenge. Mitchell Levy, who's been our December speaker for several years, this will start on March the 8th. It normally is $279 or $97. Today, it's the cost of a cup of coffee, I think $5. But it starts March the 8th. It will be on our website. You can reach out to me about it, but if you want to write it down, you can go to aha.pub/5DC. I know we'll put this out on the, we'll put this out on the website, but if you want to break through the noise and be seen and heard, this is your big yes. Sign up for the 5-day credibility challenge. And I think you will find just a few minutes a day, but you'll find that Mitchell is turning this into a movement, as we talked about. And finally, check out Work Innovators, Essie Elise and Company. They're also a partner member, and I can't tell you some of the things they're doing. The temperature check at the door, just the virtual, the tied into your HR system. There's so much there. So check that out as well. We appreciate you, Essie. And as we wrap up, as you well know, things are not free. We've not been meeting in person, but we do other things besides just the meetings. But take a moment, go to our website. I stole this from Randy, actually, but under membership, you'll find a donation link with a blank amount. Suggested donations $20, but these are things, this is money that keeps us going, that keeps us active as well during these times. And we would greatly appreciate any amount you decide, whatever's comfortable for you. That could be zero to whatever. And if you really enjoyed today, join. Our membership applications on the website, you can join easily, walk you right through it. All 12 meetings, continental breakfast buffet once we're back, and we're back next month. Best of the best in speakers, first time guests are literally free. It's just, you build truly meaningful relationships. It's $345 a year for an individual. If you're a part of our young executives, it's $245. But that's the meetings, the breakfast, first time guests. Just take a moment and join today. You can walk right through it. Also, we're invoicing current members. When you get to your invoice, keep Jan happy and pay it. He gets upset when they're not paid.
I really do.
You do, yeah. And then he calls me up. But our guest policy is very simple. First time guests are always welcome and free. Second time, okay, but the third time, it's kind of like going to somebody's house and not bringing a dish. It's time to join. So we'd love to have you. We usually do special introductions at this point, people new to Dallas, people in transition. We're saving those for when we're back in person so we can have you stand up. And finally, the nice part about this and the nice part about next month and the months to come, all the registered attendees will be receiving a link to the video of today. There was a huge amount of information. I know I, for one, am going to listen to it again tonight. And we have your permission to put the slides out?
Oh, sure.
So we'll have the slides available to you. But as we close out today, and we will be going to Q&A, I want to thank each and every one of you for coming. I want to thank each and every one of you for making Success North Dallas extraordinary. Thank our partner members, our volunteers, and may you do what you love to do with people you love to do it with on purpose. God bless and Godspeed. Thank you all for being here. Jan, Lucinda, Casey, let's see who's out there. Let's go to some virtual networking as we go to the Q&A portion. And Steve, thank you. What's the number one point you want to leave with everybody? Just that one thing.
Yeah, let's figure out how to hug our people virtually.
Beautiful. Who's got the first question?
I've got to leave in a minute, but I'll ask Steve a question. Steve, I think that you are certainly right that whatever was normal, it's not going to be the same afterwards. But I'm wondering how hungry people are. A few years ago, JCPenney's hired a new CEO that never moved here where the headquarters were of JCPenney's. And he flew in and flew out, and he sort of was never embraced, and it did not work out. I'm wondering how much it's going to be important to reconnect humanly after COVID. That's my question.
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah, Randy, it's another one of the biggest questions, and it relates really to how do you grow and maintain an organizational culture in a blended workforce environment? I have a good friend who's now the president of a company, and he has never ever relocated from Alexandria, Virginia, to where that company is headquartered in northern Alabama, in Huntsville, Alabama. A huge, gigantic mistake. You have an example here, though, in North Texas, in Plano, where there's been a consolidation of Toyota North America onto a single campus for one of the first times in history. And their leadership is now figuring out how to bring those subcultures together under a single umbrella of Toyota North America. and operating under Toyota worldwide. Those are the kinds of things that are going on. I'm not sure about. I think where a leader ought to be is, I think, the crux of your question, and I don't have a great answer for that right now. I'll tell you how I used to decide where a leader ought to be is I used to identify where the greatest risks to my organization were going to be during that day. We had this meeting every morning when I was in the Army. Where are the greatest risks to the organization today? And the leader with the greatest insight to overcoming or mitigating that risk is I put him or her there. And then where's the second greatest risk? And I put the next risk there. And then it was after risks were handled, then what decisions need to be made today? And I put a decision maker in those places. That's how we distributed ourselves around the battlefield during the course of an operation. I think there may be an analogy to that, but it's a great question. I need to think more about it, but I'll shoot you a note if I come up with a solution.
Thanks. Here in Texas, one of the things that just happened is the board of ERCOT, which oversees the power, 5 members resigned and all 5 of them live out of state. So that's kind of interesting. So
That really caught my attention. And then when many of the mayors and other people around the state did not even know that they lived out of state. So that caught my attention too. Jan, any questions in the chat or any other questions out there?
If you got a question out there, just go ahead and raise your hand and ask your questions. There was all positive comments, Steve. Everybody really enjoyed the presentation today.
Glenn.
Your presentation was amazing. And a lot of what you said fits into the training I've been doing over the last 5 years. And one of the things that you said was about, you have to make a decision and move forward. But just because you make a decision and move forward doesn't mean that you can't use feedback and tweak things as you go, which is kind of the best way forward right now with everything changing so fast like we were talking about. But the question that I have for you is that, I don't know if you're familiar with the Barrett Value Center, but they do value assessments for individuals, and then you can do it on a larger scale with teams and corporations or whatever. But how do you feel about values and corporate culture becoming extremely important in the next years to come, and as we go through getting out of this COVID situation as well?
I have a prejudice about corporate culture. In fact, I have a prejudice about leadership in general. We banty a bunch of words about, and we never explain what the hell we're talking about to anybody. We'll say, hey, let's hire for corporate culture, and nobody ever tells you what that looks like. Or let's fire for culture. Nobody ever tells you what that looks like. And if I pinned you down and said, define corporate culture to me, you're going to come up with an answer that's the same or that's different than Shelley's, that's different than Lucinda's, that's different than JJ's, that's different than Alan's. By the way, you're all going to be right. And so, where do we go next is you're going to pick up a book by Edgar Schein on leadership and organization or culture, 450 pages, and you're not going to read it. You're not going to read one word of it because nobody is going to be able to put it into practice. So here's my point about culture. Incredibly important. By the way, you have a culture whether you're working at it or not. You have a culture that is generating the results that your organization is or is not achieving against your strategic objectives. That's a byproduct, that's an artifact of your culture. Your values, in my judgment, are an element of your culture. If you have good values that, by the way, are practiced and not just put up on a poster inside the boardroom or next to the break room. If you have practiced values, I think they're an element of the culture. But I would also tell you that where culture is concerned, organizations have got to stop talking about it, and they got to get their leadership in the room, and they've got to figure out what it is that they're generally talking about and describe it for themselves. Don't ask me to come in and help you define organizational culture. You guys figure it out and tell everybody, when I talk about culture, this is what it means. When I talk about accountability, this is what it means. When I talk about leadership, this is what it means. Very few organizations I've bumped into, and I'm going to riff for a bit, Glenn, because you got me started. But very few organizations define any of those words. And then they'll say, well, I'm going to promote you for your great leadership. They don't even have a definition of leadership in their company. How in the world can you promote me for something that you haven't defined? And it ends up being intuition and gut check. I don't want it to be an academic, how many, leadership angels can you get to sit on the head of a pen? That's impractical. But what I do think that we ought to do as leaders is sit around, and when we say leadership, accountability, or whatever, we better make damn sure we know what the hell we're talking about for our organizations, for us. So
what we're finding is that a lot of, just kind of like what you say, is that a lot of companies, they say that their values are one thing, and then the way that they operate is completely different. And
Sure.
so with the value assessment, they're able to see the gaps and because when you take the executive team and you take the management team and you take the employees and you see what their values are personally, and then you see what the values are that they see as portrayed, the company portraying, and then they look at the values of what the employees and everybody would like to be of the company, and they start looking at how those integrate. There's some really big gaps that we're seeing in a lot of companies. So it's been interesting. And what you're saying is so true.
It's huge, right? If you ask a leader in an organization what their values are, I will bet that there's some percentage that's double digits that won't know what they are. Number one, I guarantee you their performance review systems don't replicate their values. If it's important, you ought to be measuring it, right? So there ought to be a connection between your culture and your performance review systems. And yet, there's huge lack of confidence in performance review systems. They don't provide meaningful feedback, and they aren't related to the organization's outcomes. And so what are we doing? Well, folks like Eli Lilly are doing away with the whole thing. Well, now what do I got? That's wonderful. But now I'm going to rack and stack my talent in my head. I'm going to rank them from top to bottom. In the absence of a performance review system, now I'm just doing it by gut. That's not good either. So we got to do better. And it's easy for a guy sitting here in a nice, comfortable studio to say that kind of stuff. This is hard work, but you got to do it. So let's stop talking about it and get after it. I'm a little irritated about that. if it doesn't show.
Mine's more of a quick comment. It made me think of servant leadership, of leaders taking action, whatever, the get dirty, and actually demonstrating for their team versus just talking about it and saying, you go do, but they're actually in there with them.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of servant leadership. I would tell you that it can be taken too far, though, too. And I will tell you where it's going to be taken too far in your organizations. First of all, leaders got to show up for more than a photo op. So you got to be on the plant floor and be there, or you got to be in your businesses, talking to people and engaging with them. This is one of the things that we use to overcome a VUCA environment. You got to look your people in the eye, either virtually or face to face. You got to look them in the eye and ask them, how are you doing? No, really, how are you doing? You can't do that if you're not there. So there's an old Army adage, you got to be where your soldiers are. If they're cold, you need to be cold. If they're hungry, you need to be hungry. If you're serving chow in an Army unit, the leaders are at the back of the line. So if you run out of chow, leaders don't eat. But for goodness sakes, I got to sit in my Zoom rooms and I got to do this and I got to do that. That's not where the health of your organization is. So where it's challenged is here. Young leaders first promoted into their first leadership position have a hard time stopping doing and starting teaching and coaching. They will try very hard. They know how to do that job. I had a boss walk in my office, another Army 2-star general, now a 3-star general at the time. You'll know the name because he's been in the news in the past week. He was just hired by the House Speaker to investigate the January 6 activities at the Capitol, General Russ Honore. Russ Honore standing in my office. He was my division commander in Korea, and he says, "You want to know, gunfighter, why I'm in your office giving you such a ration of stuff all the time? He goes, I know how to do your job. It's my job. I'm still figuring out. And so it's when young leaders are promoted to that next level, they know how to do the job they just left. They don't know how to lead. And so being present and rolling your sleeves up is useful, but at that level, it often gets taken too far. And before long, you'll see a leader with a welding hood on that's not doing any leading. They're doing all the working, and all of their people that they ought to be teaching and coaching how to grow the business are sitting around watching them. And they're impressed because the boss knows how to do this, but they've now grown the organization from this to a funnel. Everything's got to go through the ball. So thanks for the question.
Next question.
This is Susan Younger, and I work with the bank code personality, which identifies how people make a buy-in decision in less than 90 seconds. What I love about it and how that relates to what you're talking about is you start to see how someone chooses to participate in any activity or discussion, which then allows you to engage with them in a way addressing the way they're looking at the problem, they're looking at the opportunity, which may be completely different than the way you're presenting it to them. To me, that becomes one of those easy tools for starting that discussion to do exactly what you're talking about. And I think that those tough discussions frequently don't happen because nobody knows how to present that to somebody without it sounding like all I'm doing is complaining or all I'm doing is pointing out a problem, because neither one knows how to listen to the other.
Right. And it's going to get worse, I'm afraid, because if there's an endangered species out there, it's listening and social awareness being driven by the I generation. And, and I say that kind of judgmentally, but, whenever my grandson is getting a little bit too rambunctious and I need to do something else, what do? Is I stick an iPad in his face. So I'm at fault. But we are losing the ability to have conversations, to have interpersonal dialogue in a constructive way. The banks that we work with report readily to us that they are hiring humans that don't know how to look another in the face, sit in an airport waiting area, and just count how many people are on their iPads or their iPhones. And you think, do we have a problem? Yes, we have a problem. We don't know how to listen. We don't know how to deal with one another anymore. And until we put our iPads down, we're never going to learn it. That's a skill. I have a socially awkward 37-year-old. And he's my son, so I'm responsible. But it's one of those things that he's got to practice. Unless he practices, he's not going to get any good at it. So we watched a birthday party last night, a 40th birthday party at a bar not far from here. 9 men sitting around the table celebrating their friend's 40th birthday. 5 of them were on their iPhones. Holy moly. Thanks for coming to my birthday party and then ignoring me. That's the message that we communicate. It's going to get worse, I'm afraid. So good luck to you. That's important work.
I was walking across the campus at SMU, the not too distant past before all this, and I was amazed. They were not walking in groups. They had their iPad or their iPhone or their earphones in, and they were almost autonomous. Whereas before in the college campuses, it was groups everywhere. And I'm seeing more and more of that today. Any more questions? Hello, Tom Neeson. Hello, Charlie Barr. That's a
Sandra
great.
has a question.
Whom?
Sandra.
Ah,
Hey,
Sandra.
everybody. Hi, good morning. So I was listening and it just seemed like the right time since we were talking about the attachment to devices and faces being in them all the time. You had mentioned, Steve, that there is a difficulty in gaining trust, especially in this Zoom world where we don't have the benefit of seeing the nuances so easily with the alignment or the ability to trust somebody being more difficult. And wondering if you see, because I work on the subtle nuances of neuroscience whenever I'm talking with, my clients and helping them to communicate and adjusting to this normal now. And I do think that, I mean, I have to think this, I believe that there is some benefit to actually having leaders, including those that are leading sales for your company, to be able to
Idiot.
be very,
Fucking
very,
idiot.
to be very, hi, Tom, we can hear you.
Tom, mute yourself.
To actually be enhancing their appearance and their ability to lead through the webcam by understanding how to present themselves. Do you see that there's a benefit for that? I understand it's not the same as being in person, but sometimes we don't have a choice in doing that.
Right.
Can you speak to that a little bit? Do you see that there's some benefit in that, or what are your thoughts?
Well, this Zoom methodology, Bill and I were talking about it this morning. In fact, the one thing that I found interesting about Zoom is that fewer people stagger into a meeting these days late than they used to be when there's a Zoom. Fewer people excuse themselves if you early from a meeting. More people, if you enforce it, will put their cameras on so that you can actually look them in the face. There's nothing that, to me, in a if I call a meeting of my team, right, I want to see their face. Otherwise, I just have a teleconference. So I want to see their face. I want to read the nonverbal cues. You know, what is the statistic? 70% of communication is through nonverbal cues, some high percentage, 70 to 80%. So I want to see their face. If you insist on blacking your screen, then we might as well use a different medium. It's not going to work here. But to your question, what I think is missing in Zoom meetings is we have stopped building in the time to hang around before the meeting, to clink coffee cups, to hey, stick around, let's chat about this. We don't have that corridor hallway time anymore that I think needs to get built back into meetings, built back into Zoom at least. And Zoom has been almost too effective, Zoom or whatever medium we're using, WebEx or Teams or GoToMeeting, it's almost been too effective at necking down the business. But all of the business leaders need to conduct with their people is not being driven by the agenda for the meeting. Sometimes it's the conversation that you just want to have. So that's one element. Second element, I find this really fascinating. You're into neuroscience. So one of the best books that I've read, it was recommended by Dan Pink. For anybody that knows who Dan Pink is as an author, right? Dan Pink recommended a book toward the end of last year. The title of it is The Biggest Bluff, written by a woman, Maria Konnikova. She is a PhD psychologist from Columbia University. She studied decision-making in the face of incomplete information. That's the nature of her dissertation. What she ultimately did was she decided that she would further her study by immersing herself in the world of professional no-limit Texas Hold'em and would learn decision-making from the poker playing framework. And so she started the year, she found herself a mentor that approached poker from a human perspective. His drive was, what I'm really trying to do is to beat the other human. I'm not trying to beat the cards. I want to try to beat the human. So if I'm reading it from an analytical perspective, I'm trying to beat the cards, I'm figuring probabilities, etc. She approached it from a completely emotional perspective, as did he. I need to read the other human at the table. And where what you're talking about related, she wrote a chapter on tells. One of the things that she cited in that chapter is a study, I want to say it was from either Yale or Harvard, but the study related to how do we know, if I just gave you 100 hours of video of professional poker players, and we have this typical, the Zoom image, right? Essentially mid-chest up, mid-waist up. And I said, all right, they've just looked at their cards. Does Sandra have a good hand or a bad hand? Their guesses were no better than chance, no better than flipping a coin. So then they presented a second series of videos that honed in on the face, because the traditional wisdom is the eyes are the portrait to your soul. So I can read you by watching your eyes. So they would read the eyes of the poker player, and what she learned is that eyes lie. Their probability of guessing whether the human had a good hand or not went down significantly. So what did they do next? Is they went to hands. So this gets back to Sandra's question about or not Sandra, but Susan's question about engagement, and your question about how do we do this. We need to change the frame in our Zoom calls. I can read your engagement by watching your hands. I can tell that when we watch people's hands, the ability to predict whether they had a good or bad hand skyrocketed. The way that they would stack chips, whether they would slam them on the card, or whether, I mean, I got the hand now. And there are players that will put their chips on their cards every single time, but you'll do it in a subtly different way if you have a good hand versus a bad hand. It was fascinating. So my hack would be, let's change the views on our Zoom, step back a little bit so I can see your hands. That'll allow me to measure your engagement with whatever it is we're talking about. I hope that was helpful. The book is fascinating. She does a really nice job.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you. I'll check it out.
That might be a must read.
It is a must read. It's a really, really fine book. And it walks the gamut of topics we've talked about even today, especially decision-making in the face of incomplete information. But she talked about being a victim, poker players that live way too long in the last bad hand they played. You know, you got to get over that. It's kind of like the quarterbacks that throw an interception. You got to get past it. That was then. Let's go out and throw a touchdown now. Bad poker players live in the past. That's being a victim. That's accountability. She talked about bias, sitting down at the table and measuring somebody by how they looked, only to be taken completely by the kind old man from wherever that was, wanted to buy her a drink or something, and just nuts. So it's a fascinating read. And like I said, she does a really, really nice job of weaving in her journey poker-wise with her experience and learning about psychology and leadership. Really good job.
One more question. It's 9:25. We got about 5 more minutes.
Yeah, the title of the book was The Biggest Bluff.
Yes, sir. The Biggest Bluff, Maria Konnikova.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank everybody. Steve, thank you. This has been special. Ellen, come up here. Watch the wires, but I want to introduce, as we leave, Ellen Houlihan. She's a part of Catalyzer. And they work with a large number of police departments around the U.S. Right here. Yeah, why not? Make us look good. She's taller than us. We should get another pillow.
We should.
But they work with a lot of police departments and universities around the U.S. I know they have a meeting with Dallas, or a representative therein.
Yeah, UT Dallas this afternoon.
And the Dallas Police Department, the North Texas Crime Commission, they're meeting with. So just keep them in the back of your mind. Steve, I bet you're coming back to going to visit us on a third Wednesday when we're back in person.
Yeah, we might have to do that.
We might have to welcome you back.
Okay, I'd love to do
And
that.
Ellen, thank you for always being there. Jan Claudner, thank you for working the board. Holden back there with Jeff, thank you for producing it. And to all of our volunteers, our partner members, our members, our friends, our family, which is what it really is. I want to thank each and every one of you. Mark your calendars. Come visit if you're comfortable. We so want you to come in person to Prestonwood Country Club on March the 17th. We'll be convening there from 7 to 9 a.m. or at 9:30 as we normally do. It will be Misty Purdue. Again, Misty Purdue. One side of her family is Purdue Chicken. The other side's Hilton Hotels. And right in the middle is anti-trafficking. Their passion. And she's a phenomenal lady. I've spent time with her in the past, and I'm looking forward to her flying in, and we will have a great time. So with that, I'm going to reiterate, may you do what you love to do with people you love to do it with, on purpose. God bless and Godspeed. Bye all.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Jan.
Hey, read that certificate for 12 cuts. You can't use it this week. It's got to be a next trip.
Okay,
So you have to come back.
I see what you did there. Thank you.
What
you,
is,
guys.
Good day, everybody.
bye. Holden, thank you. Ellen, thank you.